my sister and niece will be moving in with us. You, an outsider, should go to some cheap apartment." Upon hearing John's words, I was wide-eyed in disbelief. My mouth hung open in shock. Not knowing was frightening. The deed to this house is in my name. Even if I agree to transfer it to John, I'm paying a mortgage of $1,800 though. I thought for a while and then smiled broadly. I don't mind leaving, but if that's the case, I want a divorce. John then smirked back at me. "Well, now that Dad's dead, you're of no use to me anymore." He seemed almost nonchalant about it. "Since you brought it up, there will be no division of property." His condescending tone made me lower my head, covering my mouth. "Understood." Hearing my trembling voice, John burst into laughter. Cry. "Did you think I'd beg you to stay? Blame your own pathetic self for being abandoned by your husband." I clenched my fists and shivered, struggling to hold back. Not tears, but laughter. Unaware of what awaited him, John thought he held the upper hand. To distract myself, I pondered where to live next. That place would be perfect. The image of a $1 million luxury apartment tower came to mind. My name is Kimberly, 34 years old. My husband, John, is an office worker at a high school, 2 years my senior at 36. John works at a private girls' high school. Being one of the younger male staff, he seems popular among the students. He often brings home letters and receives numerous chocolates on Valentine's Day. Each time, John would make a face as if to say, "Give me a break." "You don't make that face in front of the students who gave them to you, do you?" John clicked his tongue in response. "Of course not. But I wonder why they give them to me, even though I wear a wedding ring." "It's fine. Just accept the letters and chocolates." I reminisced about my high school days, thinking about how young they were. Back then, I also had a crush on a teacher more than 10 years my senior. Idiot. If any weird rumors start at a girls' school, they spread horribly. This is where John was very serious. Thankfully, he never crossed the line with any students, despite their advances. His seriousness might be a trait inherited from his father, who was also a teacher. We live with John's parents. We had planned to move out when we had children, but unfortunately, we haven't been blessed with any yet. Although I work part-time, we can't afford to save much from the money John brings home. Living with John's parents is comfortable, and they are very kind to me. My current concern is John's father's deteriorating health. His walking has become more difficult, and he can't go on his beloved walks as much. So, I bought a wheelchair to take him outside as much as possible. I used to work during the day, but now I work early mornings at a bakery. This way, I can spend the afternoons with John's parents, going for walks or shopping. My own parents have passed away, so I treasure John's parents as my own. Although my parents left me some inheritance, I still wish they were alive. John has an older sister, Christina, who is 4 years older. Christina has a husband who works for a major company and a 17-year-old daughter, Brittany. John and I got married 10 years ago. Since then, Christina, who also works, often left Brittany at our place. Brittany and I got along very well. She calls me Sister Kimberly and adores me like a real sister. Being an only child, I was happy about this. And even now that she no longer needs to be looked after, we keep in touch regularly. However, Christina and I don't get along well. I haven't had a good impression of her since we first met when John and I greeted his parents. The first thing she said upon seeing me was, "I thought he would have chosen someone cuter," and laughed. John didn't defend me then. If his parents hadn't scolded Christina at that moment, I probably wouldn't have married John. I don't choose based on looks alone. For marriage, what's inside is what counts. John's words, said as an afterthought, didn't resonate with me. I felt more cherished by his parents, who immediately got angry on my behalf. I wanted to be filial to John's parents, as I couldn't be to my own. Recently, Christina has been visiting home more often. She doesn't talk to me about it, but from what I hear her say to John and his parents, it seems she's constantly fighting with her husband. Despite both working, he nags her for not doing enough at home, like cleaning. Well, if I only worked a few hours like Kimberly, I could manage the housework too. But I work full-time. She said this snidely, glancing at me. Christina always seemed to compare herself to me. I've wondered why, and it seems she's competing with me. It seems that Christina didn't like the fact that my in-laws defended me when we first met. Eventually, John defended me too, which seemed to double her anger. Well, Kimberly only manages because Mom helps her out. If she were alone, she wouldn't be able to do anything. Hearing this, Christina chuckled. Unlike me, she doesn't have kids and gets help from Mom. It's only natural she can handle the housework.
Yeah,
but even then, she's not really managing. Sister, you're doing better than her, right? The two of them laughed at me, making fun of me. Catching the cold gaze of my mother-in-law, John suddenly coughed to cover his unease. But, Kimberly is trying hard, right? Like taking care of Dad since his legs got worse. Ignoring the astonished Christina, I moved to the bedroom. Feeling a bit worried, I called Brittany. Brittany said calmly, "Oh, that's just Mom being difficult. She should be able to handle the housework while Brittany is at her cram school." But for some reason, she doesn't. From Brittany's account, it didn't seem like she was being unfairly scolded. Generally, John sides with Christina. Christina may be competitive towards me. But John also seems to have a rivalry with his brother-in-law, who works in a top-tier company. However, as his wife, I have to say John is completely losing to his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law brings much more money to his family than John does. I'm not talking about low income. It's about how much of their salary they can dedicate to their family. I don't know the exact amount of John's income. He doesn't know, nor seems to care, how much money I have or how much I earn from my part-time job. All I ask is for him to make sure we can live within the means of the money he contributes. I don't know what he does with the rest of his salary. But occasionally, he comes home late. I was drinking with colleagues. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. John, who dislikes being the subject of strange rumors among his students, wouldn't cheat. I believed that. John contributes $1,000 to the household. Normally, this would be insufficient for living. This alone could be a valid reason for divorce or endless arguments, I believe. This is my parents' house, so we don't need to pay rent, right? But still, $1,000 is a bit. Then why don't you ask Mom and Dad for living expenses? That's not what I mean. It seems my point isn't getting through to John. I'm not asking him to support us three alone. But his words and attitude show a lack of responsibility towards the family. Say that after you give birth to a childlike sister. To top it off, he says things like this, knowing it would hurt me. I realized my husband could care for his sister, but not his wife. Meanwhile, my father-in-law's health is getting worse. Our house, surrounded by many slopes, is inconvenient for wheelchair accessibility. Shall we move? I took the opportunity when John was not around to suggest this to my in-laws. That's all well and good, but the budget. We can use the money from selling this house, and I'll pay the remaining mortgage. At my words, my in-laws looked at each other. But Kimberly, do you have that kind of money? You're already contributing more to the living expenses than John, aren't you? I reassured my apologetic mother-in-law, it's okay. I have an inheritance from my parents. If it's for my father-in-law and mother-in-law, my parents would be happy for me to use it. By this time, I might have almost lost my love for John. But I liked my in-laws and wanted to continue living with them. John was informed by his parents, and we decided to move to a new house. We remodeled it before moving, making it barrier-free. Handrails were installed to make it easier for my father-in-law to move around. I think the new house is much more accessible for him. The old house made even going to the toilet difficult, but here, he can go with ease. At first, the two were reluctant, but they felt better after I agreed to one condition. That condition was to keep the new house under my name, a secret from John. Also, not to tell John about my parents' inheritance. If John knows you have money, he'll depend on you even more. We can't allow that. They wanted to protect me from John, rather than relying on my parents' inheritance. I was really happy when my father-in-law said this. I wish I were a bit healthier. I'm sorry for the trouble. As he apologized, I waved my hands. No, it's not a trouble at all. I look forward to walking with you every day. At my words, my father-in-law smiled back. Thank you. Since he couldn't walk much, he lost his appetite and became much thinner. If this makes walking easier and he regains his former vitality, that's what I truly hoped for. Wow, what a beautiful house. Christina, who came to visit, said this while walking around the house without restraint. She tapped the handrails. But these handrails are in the way. They ruin the look. I think it's more important for your father to walk safely than the aesthetics. My response seemed to displease her. She snorted and said nothing more. We always keep the toilet lid up in our house. This is because the action of lifting the lid is a strain for my father-in-law, who has bad legs. To compensate, I make sure to clean it regularly to prevent any smell. Even with handrails, lifting the lid requires bending forward or bending the knees, which he finds painful. Yet, every time Christina uses the bathroom, she closes the toilet lid. No matter how many times I explain, she doesn't stop. Once, a loud crashing sound came from the bathroom when my father-in-law was using it. Rushing there, I found him collapsed on the bathroom floor. He had lost his balance trying to open the lid. I've told you so many times, haven't I? Please don't close the lid. While helping my father-in-law up, I spoke sternly to Christina. Even though she's my sister-in-law, I couldn't forgive her this time. Fortunately, it seemed he wasn't seriously injured, but that's not the point. But, leaving the lid open is unsanitary, isn't it? It's also bad feng shui to leave the toilet lid open. That's such nonsense. That doesn't matter. Do you want to cause your father to get hurt? This time, my usually calm mother-in-law was angrier than I was. Now, Mom. Sister didn't mean any harm. Exactly. It's exaggerated to say I caused Dad to get hurt. Christina's laughter didn't calm my mother-in-law's anger. She told her to leave immediately. Now we can live in peace for a while. My relief was short-lived. Soon after, cancer was discovered in my father-in-law. Sadly, by the time it was found, it had already spread throughout his body. There was nothing that could be done, and he passed away after just 6 months. After the funeral, I overheard a conversation that shocked me. Now this house will be yours, right? I wonder. Isn't Mom inheriting it? My mother-in-law, who was about to enter the living room, froze. But it's good, right? If it had dragged on, caring for him would have been tough.
Yeah.
But we have a convenient maid at home. Oh, that's harsh. I firmly grasped my mother-in-law's wrist, preventing her from opening the living room door. She was visibly angry, and I shook my head at her. Maybe Brittany and I should move in too. Inside, Christina laughed cheerfully. I must have looked as angry as I felt. And now I had another reason to be angry with John. While preparing funeral clothes, I found suspicious receipts and women's business cards in John's suit. Searching his bag, I found several more. They were from distant places, probably to avoid detection by school staff or students. The realization that he was using money for such purposes instead of contributing to the household infuriated me. By then, I was contemplating how to kick John out of the house. Sister and niece will move in with us. You, an outsider, should go to some cheap apartment. I was stunned when John suddenly told me this a few days after the month memorial service. It seemed Christina and her husband were increasingly at odds, and she had declared she would return to her parents' home, thinking her husband would apologize and ask her back.
Ah,
I see. So that's her plan. I hadn't expected them to try to push me out, but John was unaware. He didn't know that the house was in my name. The $1,800 mortgage, I'm paying it. I was only thinking about how to kick John out, but this was another way. I might as well transfer the deed to John. I thought for a while and then smiled. I don't mind leaving, but if I do, I want a divorce. If I were to leave, I'd need a divorce to prevent any repercussions to myself. But John, unaware of my thoughts, smirked back at me. Well, Dad's dead, and you're of no use to me anymore. He had a smug, unpleasant expression as if to say, that's fine. Since you brought it up, there'll be no division of property. His condescending manner made me lower my face, covering my mouth. Understood. Hearing my trembling voice, John laughed out loud. Cry. Did you think I'd beg you to stay? Blame your own pathetic self for being abandoned by your husband. I clenched my fists and shivered, holding back laughter. He had no idea what was coming to him and thought he was in a superior position. To divert my thoughts from the ridiculous John, I pondered where to live next. That place would be perfect. The $1 million luxury apartment left to me by my parents came to mind. The family currently renting it was planning to move out, as the real estate agent managing it had told me. My parents left me several properties. The monthly rents provide me with ample wealth. Among them, this apartment, my parents' dream, was special. I hadn't been interested before, but living in the last house my parents lived in didn't seem bad. However, I had one concern. If I moved there, I'd have to live with my mother-in-law and Brittany in this house. I had been trying to figure out how to save them. Then I'll enter a facility. When I discussed divorcing John and leaving the house, my mother-in-law told this to John and Christina. Huh? What are you talking about? My sister is finally coming back. Exactly. Dad would be sad if you said such a thing. Dad would be sad? She must have been thinking, what is this woman who said, it's good that father died, talking about? At that moment, a good strategy came to my mind. I whispered to my mother-in-law so that the others wouldn't hear. If they won't let me leave, I'll just have to be kicked out. So, I decided to continue living at the house for a while, assuming the divorce. I would share a room with my mother-in-law. This was on the condition that it was until I found a new house. When Christina and Brittany moved in, my mother-in-law and I executed our plan. There's no dinner for father. At dinner time, her words made the other three freeze. Huh? What are you talking about? Dad is dead. John was shocked, Christina got angry, and Brittany looked worriedly at my mother-in-law. Each had their own reaction. It was hard to keep it a secret from Brittany, even though it was to avoid suspicion. What a thing to say. Apologize to father. It's bad luck, right, Dad? She spoke to the seat where my father-in-law used to sit. An indescribable atmosphere filled the room. And I silently prepared a meal for my father-in-law as well. My mother-in-law continued to act as if my father-in-law were still there. Closing the toilet lid will trouble Dad. This was meant to discipline Christina and John, who had laughed at my deceased father-in-law. But I also wanted to test whether they could really take responsibility for my mother-in-law. Christina roughly dragged my mother-in-law to the family altar. "Where do you see Dad? He's not here anymore. Look, there's even an altar." Despite Christina's yelling, my mother-in-law remained undisturbed and sat down in front of the altar, facing her. "He is right here." She looked towards the altar, speaking in a calm, cold voice to Christina. "All your awful words and behavior, Dad is watching. Always." Christina's face showed she was horrified. "Stop it," she exclaimed and left the room. As expected, Christina was the first to crack. "Mom's finally gone senile. But every time we take her to the hospital, they say there's nothing wrong, right?" "Exactly. She acts all normal outside. All proper in front of the neighbors. I can't stand it anymore."
Yeah.
"But the house still has a mortgage, right? We need Mom's pension for the payments." The two of them were whispering in the living room. I was doing the dishes, pretending not to listen. It's hard to find a facility quickly, and it costs a lot. "Sister, can you afford it?" "What? Of course not. I have to pay for Brittany's university tuition until she graduates." It seemed they were more worried about the mortgage and money than their mother. Pathetic people. Reaching my limit, I turned off the tap and interrupted their conversation. "I found a new house. If you like, I can take mother-in-law with me. Until we find a good facility." The two exchanged glances, and I added, "Also, I'm the one paying the mortgage for this house." "What? Really? So that means—" John mumbled to himself as if he had an idea. "After deducting living expenses from your part-time job, you can still pay it." I knew John would come to such a conclusion. He must be thinking, now with sister's income, it'll be fine. I smiled to myself, pretending not to hear, and said to John, "If I take your mother with me, I'll transfer the deed and mortgage payments to you, John." John just answered, "Okay." I felt relieved that I could protect my mother-in-law, but then a new issue arose. Or rather, it was perhaps more convenient for us. Brittany, returning from high school, came to me with a serious look to consult. She suspected Christina might be having an affair. Apparently, Brittany's friend saw Christina walking arm in arm with a man in a suit at night. Definitely not her father. The friend, who knew Brittany's dad, whispered to her it was a different man. As I listened more, it happened during the time Brittany was at cram school. Christina's inability to manage the house was not because of her child or job. It was because she was having an affair while her daughter was at cram school. I told Brittany, "Leave this to me," and made her promise not to tell anyone. I immediately hired a detective. I requested an investigation into Christina's affair. Separated from her husband, Christina must have let her guard down. Or perhaps, like us, she was thinking of divorce. But she let her guard down too soon. They were separated, but not yet divorced. The evidence gathered by the detective revealed Christina's affair. And her husband initiated the divorce. Brittany was to be taken in by her father. And Christina ended up being sued for compensation by her husband. And the man she was involved with. Relieved, my mother-in-law and I left the house and moved to the $1 million luxury apartment. One peaceful evening, the doorbell suddenly rang. When I answered, I saw John and Christina on the monitor. "What can I do for you?" I feigned ignorance, to which John angrily retorted, "Because you wouldn't answer the phone." "I'll be right out." I informed my worried mother-in-law and left the house. I had no intention of letting those people into my home, nor letting them step inside the automatic doors. I would have overlooked this if they had just stayed quiet. Sighing, I went to the entrance hall. "Let's not talk here." I got into my car and drove to a certain cafe. Inside the car, John kept complaining loudly. How can you live in such an amazing luxury apartment? It was left to me by my parents. I had been renting it out until now. Why didn't you tell me something so important? I felt a twitch in my temple. Why should I? I was properly contributing to our living expenses. And this property doesn't fall under property division anyway. After all, it was John who had insisted there be no division of property. He had no right to complain. Upon arriving at the cafe and sitting down, as expected, the topic of conversation turned out to be about the mortgage of the family home. Why is it so high? $1,800 a month. His voice was low, but his face was red with anger. He probably wanted to yell at me right there. I took a slow sip of my coffee and smiled. It's the value of living in such a house, isn't it? Don't joke with me. He slammed the table and yelled. Christina tried to calm him down as everyone in the cafe turned to look. Stop it, John. But Kimberly, you should have mentioned such a high mortgage. I almost laughed at their desperation. There was no sense of gratitude for all the payments I had made until now. You never asked. Besides, you left almost all the paperwork for the name change to me. I implied that it was wrong to complain only when it was inconvenient for them. But perhaps it was inevitable. After all, Christina was being sued for compensation by her brother-in-law. And also by her affair partner's wife. Additionally, her affair was discovered at work, making her job untenable. To me, it was all self-inflicted. I slowly turned my gaze to Christina and smiled sympathetically. It must be hard for you. What do you mean? This man hardly contributed to our household finances. What? Christina looked at John. Feeling her gaze, John mumbled, No, it's not like that. Oh, right. We only left the house a few days ago. Realizing she didn't know yet, I understood. John then said in a low voice, Don't say unnecessary things, glaring at me. Hey, what do you mean by that? Christina's gaze shifted to me and she said, Explain this. I shrugged and pulled out several papers from my bag. This man only contributed $1,000 to our household and frequented places like this. I laid out suspicious receipts from shady shops. And business cards from various women on the table. What? What is this? What were you thinking, going to these places? Christina showed more disgust than expected and, unable to contain her anger, EAD out the names of the shops loudly. Are you crazy? That's filthy. As she threw the business cards, her words seemed to hit a nerve with John. What are you talking about? You're the one who had an affair with a colleague at work. It was an ugly spat, and I quietly watched their exchange while sipping my coffee. Deciding it was time to intervene before the cafe complained, I spoke to John. Oh, right. Sorry. My comment stopped the argument between John and Christina. It seemed like an alert for John, who recognized my tone as something to be wary of. What? He asked, probing for more information. I forgot to mention, there's a popular tutoring school near this cafe. Huh? Both looked at me, puzzled. It seemed they didn't get the point yet. Many students spend time here before their classes start. I leaned closer to John and whispered. Look, familiar school uniforms here and there. With the students in casual clothes, wonder how many there are. Suddenly, John stood up noisily, looking around and noticing their gazes. Soft laughter reached my ears. The reason I chose this cafe had finally dawned on them. Just to clarify, I wasn't the one who raised my voice. John stood there, trembling, his hands on the table clenched white. Thank you for embarrassing yourself. I'm sure tomorrow's school day will be interesting. I peered into John's face with a smirk. Before me, John collapsed to the floor. Eventually, the family home was put up for sale, and John and Christina moved into an old, small apartment. Christina struggled to find a new job, and John left the girls' school. Apparently, parents had complained about an inappropriate person among the administrative staff. Even if the call hadn't come, John would have probably left. But the call spread the rumors even further. I knew about this because Brittany's friend, who attended the school where John worked, told her. John's fears had come true. The rumors spread viciously. Hearing this from Brittany, my mother-in-law expressed her disgust. Pathetic children, and I burst into laughter. Once, John and Christina came to us, relying on my inheritance and my mother-in-law's pension. They apologized profusely, but I immediately sent them away, saying, "No need for apologies now. I still live with my mother-in-law." Brittany often visits us at the apartment, enjoying the view from the windows just as much as I do. The wide sky my parents once watched, I now share with my mother-in-law every day. With the curtains wide open, our meals are always delightful. And I continue to enjoy my life with her, thinking of it as the filial piety I couldn't show my own parents.